I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm Dean Detloff, and I am not sick yet.
And I'm Matt Bernico. I'm extremely sad that the Creation Museum is closed.
What a huge bummer. A bad day for all of us. COVID-19, when will you relent?
I was going to go. This is my time. I bought my tickets. I had my Creation Museum t-shirt. I've been listening to Ken Ham for weeks. And now it's closed. And my whole trip is off. I'm so sad.
Yeah, what a tragedy. What more will you take from us?
Before we jump into the episode here, let me quickly say, first of all, we appreciate everyone who supports us on Patreon. It is amazing. It's surprising, and I can never believe that so many people like us enough to give us money, and we appreciate you all so much. It's probably good now to say that we in this terrible time where we're all stuck at home, or at least a lot of us are, we are creating a little bit more content, just a tiny bit more content, and we're putting it up there.
Just a touch, a tad, one
dollop will do ya. We're taking all of we decided that our podcast was too funny and that we were just going to take all of the funny Reddit jokes that we do at the beginning of so many of these episodes, and we're going to put them on Patreon instead of cluttering up our important Marxist work here. So if you like that content, if you like us, then you can get it at patreon.com/themagnificast.
COVID-19, we're still talking about it. We took a break last week to talk about Bruno Latour. Take one of those big philosophy breaks, stuck indoors. What else can you do but read French philosophy, I guess? You could do more. And in this episode, we're going to talk about what more you could do. So the pandemic is taking all those big structural problems with capitalism that we all know and love and exacerbating them to a tipping point. We talked about that a little bit a couple weeks ago when we looked at Mike Davis. But today we're going to talk a little bit about how people are really taking advantage of that situation and intervening in it. So workers across North America have had enough, and there are strikes and walkouts all over the place. Just to give you a few among very many. Amazon workers in New York went on strike. A guy even got fired over it, over proposing the strike. Postal workers in Edmonton, Alberta went on strike, and postal workers across Canada have been talking quite a lot about what's going on, and it's all a very unstable situation. Instacart workers around the U.S. went on strike. Sanitation workers in Pittsburgh, they had a work stoppage. McDonald's and other fast food workers across the U.S. went on strike. And it's not just workers. When we're recording this, it's April 1st, which means that rent is due. And today, even renters are planning to go on strike. So it looks like we've been right all along, or at least partially. Capitalism has created its own grave diggers.
Sorry, capitalism. We've been warning you this whole time. For years we've been saying this. It's your own fault. You're gonna cause the thing that kills you. Well, in light of this big strike wave, this week on the Magnificast, we're doing a big roundup of all the best strike content and mutual aid work that's happening at the moment. Yeah, I mean, COVID-19 is extremely grim. It's bad. It's dark. It's gonna probably kill way more people than it needs to. But I guess we can look at some thing that's happening, which is workers are seizing on the moment, and they're I don't know, learning sort of from just the material conditions they're in, and they're finding the courage and strength and solidarity to oppose their bosses and say no to what's happening, and strike together. And that's awesome and good. So we should probably shine a little bit of light on that whole situation. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll also talk about Christians responding to COVID-19 and how maybe Christians should respond a little bit more loudly about some things, and also keep on doing the very good things that they are doing. There are some good things, believe it or not, the Christians are doing, but they should be doing even more. That's the typical Magnificast line, I think, on this show. Anyway, let's start out talking a little bit about the labor situation, and then we'll get into the Christian side of it afterwards. So the exemption from stay-at-home orders for essential workers like healthcare workers makes sense, but grocery store employees and delivery services and food service workers are also counted among essential employees and essential workers, which means they're all putting themselves in harm's way to make sure that we can get food and get that new Nintendo product you've been waiting for, that you have to get through this pandemic. And also making sure that you can get that Big Mac on delivery. They're all out there making sure that you can continue to live that life. I don't know, painting that way sounds bad, but they are essential workers in reality, but they probably don't need to put their lives on the line so that people can just keep consuming. That's my hot take.
Yeah, it's not a bad hot take. I mean, you might be watching the old media cycle just happen before your eyes, and you might be thinking things like, okay, grocery store workers, I get it. I get how they're essential because that's how I get food. Or like Instacart workers, right? Like, of course they're essential because I don't want to leave my house because I'm immunocompromised, and that's how I get food. Or, those kinds of things. They make sense. But then other folks, like food service people, I've seen a lot of criticism of like, why are they essential workers? And I mean, I think it's a good question. They're essential workers insofar as they feed the communities that they're in, and I think that's true, right? They do that, and that is important. But on the other hand, like McDonald's and fast food like Wendy's and other chains like that, they spent a lot of money and time lobbying so that they could stay open during this time, so that they wouldn't get like hindered by shutdown orders. So it's not like completely altruistic that they're open. And the workers there are absolutely suffering under the circumstances, so it's all pretty bad.
Yeah, and of course it's bizarre that there's no sick leave for a lot of those people and no supports, and many of them are still being paid minimum wage, which is already too low in the first place. So it's not as though the essential worker designation awards any kind of material dignity.
That's right.
It's just kind of one more compulsion to pain, which is too bad.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so there's a lot of good articles that have come out about it. I mean, again, it's a tough situation, but at least people started caring about the working class all of a sudden. Maybe they always did. Maybe they always cared this whole time, but it seems like more care now. You can barely throw a rock without hitting an article that's about labor at the moment, and that's a good thing. I feel like that's a positive outcome, that labor reporters are really doing their job, which is not surprising because they always do their job, but just more people care right now.
Other reporters are being forced to be labor reporters, and that's also very interesting.
We should all be labor reporters, really.
That's right.
Yeah, in the New York Times, The Cut, which is like I guess an imprint of the New York Times. I don't read the New York Times enough to know about that at all, but there it is. Yeah, there's a reporter there named Bridget Reed who wrote an article called "Every Food and Delivery Strike Happening Now." It was updated today at 11:32, and today is April 1st again. So you're listening to this not on April 1st, probably. That'd be extremely weird if you were. But anyways, it's just a helpful article because it lays out every single strike going on at the moment, or that has gone on in the last day or so. And I just want to quickly read through the names because it's so good. It's a great feeling to see everything up here. So McDonald's, they did a big strike yesterday in St. Louis and in Memphis, and also in Florida. There were walkouts all over the place. They were doing a stay-home strike. It was great. Check out Show Me 15 for all the pics and the quotes and the vids. It's good. It was good. Yeah. Before that happened yesterday, though, McDonald's stores, people were walking out in Chicago and in San Jose and in Los Angeles. So there's been sort of like a wave of McDonald's activity happening over the last few weeks because of the coronavirus, particularly. So there you go. Folks at McDonald's are fighting that big union fight and trying to get organized and walking out of their workplaces, and they should. Yep, but apart from them, there's other places like Family Dollar and Food Lion and Walmart. It's good stuff. Amazon, that's the one that everyone has heard about in the last few days. We'll talk about Amazon a little bit more later in the episode. That's where an Amazon worker in New York, a guy named Chris Smalls, got fired for, well, you know, Amazon doesn't say that they got fired for going on strike, but like that's why.
He did.
He did though. Yep. Whole Foods workers are on strike. Trader Joe's workers are not on strike, but they have a pretty good union drive going at the moment, and they were sitting around a petition last week, so they're like organizing. And who knows what will happen with them, but hopefully they, I don't know, win a union. Instacart workers went on strike, I think, on Tuesday of this week, March 31st. Instacart is a like grocery delivery app. They're gig workers, and their strike is a lot more complicated because they're not just in one place geographically, they're everywhere. And anyways, all very important just the same. Talk about them a little bit later too. There's a really good Working People podcast about the Instacart strike that you should listen to as well. And then Purdue, the chicken producers in Georgia, they all walked out on the 23rd, so that was last week. So all of these things are happening because the coronavirus situation is like really just revealing sort of like all of the large structural problems of capitalism and then just twisting the knife in all of it. It's really showing, I guess, like how precarious and terrible this all is. I mean, I think it's we all kind of know, we all, if you've been on Twitter for 5 seconds, all know that everyone is just like always $500 away from their life being financially ruined. That's a thing that people usually talk about with regard to like medical bills and stuff like that. But now it's even worse than that, right? Because people have to pay rent today on April 1st, or around April 1st or whatever. They have to pay their bills, they have to pay their rent, and like a lot of people have been laid off massive amounts of people have been laid off, and they're just like screwed. And the only thing that people can do in these situations is lobby to their bosses to give them more money, wait for a government bailout, or like walk out. And a lot of people are choosing to walk out, and it's the right decision.
Yeah, I think so. It's also an interesting sort of moment because in the same way that coronavirus has revealed all kinds of strange things about capitalism that were always there, but now have hit a certain crisis point, it's also revealing, I think, the power that the working class has always had and has been trying to sort out what kind of power it has, right? So in the electoral struggle up till now, people have been funneling a lot of those kinds of energies, our collective energies, into different campaigns, and that's fine. But you can't really do that right now, right? The campaigning is kind of suspended for a minute, not completely, but certainly a lot more than it was. And I think that people are also kind of recognizing that other kinds of collective action really do get the goods, as they say. One thing that I always like to talk about when it comes to capitalism and socialism in general is the big lesson is that it's working people who have power to decide what they want to do. And if they don't show up for work, that's a big problem for people in power. And I think people are thinking about that a lot more, whether it's rent strikes with people withholding their rent. We'll talk more about that later. But whether it's that, putting pressure on landlords and governments to create real subsidies and help people through the crisis, or whether it's people not going to work until their demands are met in the middle of a crisis, it just seems like that's something that's also being revealed, this real seat of labor power that has kind of been dormant until now.
Yeah, totally. It's actually, it's a good thing to pull out that there is a presidential primary going on right now and no one gives a shit.
Right.
Like, can you even imagine, like, last month we were like really concerned about this, and now that the material conditions have forced us into considering a whole lot more things that are actually essential to our lives, like how we're going to pay our rent, how we're going to eat, are we going to be safe from this like terrible pandemic, and so on. And I don't know, it's a big society spectacle kind of moment, like the all of the sort of like spectacular capitalism that's always before us fades away when our lives are actually in question. It's actually the opposite of society of spectacle, but no big deal. It's not a big deal. I'm not gonna talk about that at all.
Yeah, but no, I mean, you're right about that, though. I mean, it is a wild thing, and revealing the spectacular nature of the world that we usually inhabit that becomes kind of less and less exciting when you're forced to stay inside all day. I mean, I watched Tiger King. Who didn't? Yeah, like the other side of it too is like this whole crisis is revealing that the political authorities that we do have are completely ill-equipped to understand the complexities of the society that they're ostensibly running, right? Even Joe Biden can't bring himself to say, yeah, it turns out maybe having Medicare for all is a good idea after all. Maybe you shouldn't have health insurance tied to your employer, especially when everybody gets laid off, right? And if Joe Biden can't understand that in light of this crisis, then surely he never, ever will. And if that's the case, then you've got to find some other movement, right? Something outside of electoral politics to put pressure on people, because that's the only way you're going to get anything. You're certainly not going to get it from Joe Biden having a change of heart, listening to the stories of American people or something like that.
Yeah. Because he doesn't even have a heart. The big Grinch, Joseph Biden.
That's right, that big green Biden. Let's get into, though, a little bit more about that, the attempt to build that very movement.
Yeah.
So there is a ton of journalism out there. We pulled out just a few articles. This one is from the Huffington Post, of all places, not usually my go-to place, but an article by Dave Jamieson that the title is "The Coronavirus Worker Revolt is Just Beginning." And the way that he puts it here, I think, is good, where he says, "The pandemic didn't cause this workplace revolt, but it has laid bare the gaping holes of the social safety net and how little security and agency most American workers have on the job. Whether they're low-wage, at-will service employees or independent contractors, quotes, paid by an algorithm, many have calculated that working under their current conditions is riskier than publicly shaming their employers for them." And then he quotes a labor organizer, "I think COVID-19 is showing the impunity with which employers can really neglect the very survival of their workers. We're talking about a real indifference to life," said Daniel Gross, a labor organizer and founder of the Food Industry Workers Center Brand Workers. "At the same time, and this is the hopeful part for me," Gross goes on to say, "we're seeing how that impunity can be undone, and undone quite rapidly when workers come together and take action." So again, it's just the sort of dual revelations here, right? On the one hand, the revelation of the failure of capitalism to get anybody through any kind of real crisis situation. And on the other hand, the revelation of real workers' power and what it means to take collective action.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, okay, I'm going to tip my hand just a little bit. I don't really want to say too much about it, but I used to be a college professor a long time ago. Now I work in a different situation. I work in the labor movement, and some of the folks I work with went on strike the other day. And just talking to, like, hearing some of their stories and talking to them is really interesting, because, like, a lot of them, this is the first time they walked out, or this is the first time they did a strike. And it is, I mean, saying it's a revelatory moment, like you just did, Dean, is exactly right, because they're just now revealing, it's like being revealed to them that, like, they do have a whole lot of power in this situation. Like, I heard a story today when I was on this phone call from this dude that was striking in Memphis, and the organizer was kind of relaying the story back to us. He was just like, yeah, this guy was telling me that he was really worried about going back to work. He didn't want his boss to, like, take any action against him, and he was trying to convince him, like, and tell him, because legally they can't, that, it's not going to happen. It's no big deal. Like, if it does, let us know. We can get a lawyer, et cetera, et cetera. But the guy was like, yeah, my boss, I went in today. My boss told me, like, yeah, you should have told me you're going to go on strike. I wouldn't have put you on the schedule. And then, like, the organizer had to explain to him, like, yeah, man, like, that's exactly the point. We don't want to tell them. But anyways, all that I'll say, like, yeah, people are really coming to understand that, like, working people have a whole lot of power, right? Just like you said, if you can, if you're scheduled to work and you don't come in, and that puts your boss in a really tough place, that's power. That's what it means to have power. Especially when, like, in these dire circumstances too that we're in, workers have way more power than they even might imagine, right? Like, a big walkout is a big deal when, like, only half the workers are actually there and still on payroll or something. At fast food restaurants, when you have, like, 3 workers in the entire restaurant or whatever, and, like, 2 of them walk out, like, your manager is screwed, and that's awesome. You should exercise that power regularly.
Yeah, that's right. I think too. So that is all very helpful with respect to the labor movement. The virus is also revealing the collective power that people even have in terms of their kind of social communities or social unions, as they're sometimes known, or things like tenants associations. Basically, other kinds of ways in which people collectivize to put pressure on different kind of choke points of capitalism. So I mentioned the rent strike earlier. I'll explain a little bit more about that. So the premise sounds simple enough. You just don't pay your rent. It's April 1st. You don't pay it. But you actually, it wouldn't be wise for just a person in general not to pay their rent. That would be a very bad idea.
Yeah.
Because you would just get evicted. Or even if, like right now in Ontario, evictions are suspended, the landlord will just wait till they're not. And then we'll find a way to evict you for sure. So what are you supposed to do then? Let's say you need that, $1,000, $2,000 a month in your pocket because you're living through a wild global pandemic right now and you don't really know what's going to happen. Well, hopefully you could find a number of other people in your building who are also willing to say, hey, sorry, but we're not going to pay our rent right now. And that is the gamble that a lot of people are making at this very moment in the US and Canada, on this very day, in fact. And I've been following a number of groups, especially tenants groups here in Toronto, because the city is already in a housing crisis before the pandemic. And there's a lot of really fascinating stuff about this very revelatory moment, like you're saying, like a lot of people who are nervous about paying their rent, not sure if they can really do it because they have, been basically suspended in their employment for a while. And it's really fascinating to kind of watch people be texting back and forth and posting screenshots of their conversations saying things like, hey, my landlord is saying they're gonna evict me like today or under these conditions. What do I do? And then other people being like, look, I'm a housing lawyer. Your landlord literally can't do that. They are lying to you, right? And it's really laying bare all kinds of strategies that that landlords have and other kind of exploitative landlord companies have to basically convince you that they deserve their money more than you do. And again, it's just kind of revealing the nature of power in society and also revealing that you actually do have more agency than you think, as long as you have other people backing you up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a great example, though, of just like the ways that organization, solidarity, and collective action do indeed get those goods, all of the goods. I mean, it's important because like organizing a rent strike, organizing a walkout at your job or whatever is going to do way more than like the government stimulus check is going to do. It's going to do way more than like, even if, so I mean, the United States isn't even, well, obviously, I guess, as progressive as Toronto right now, right? Like, mortgages might be on hold in some places and you might not have to pay them this month, but after this is over, then you'll have to pay them or whatever. But all that to say, like, even stimulus money isn't going to help you really in the long run, but like collective action will. And it's like it's an investment. We're so worried about the stock market. Oh, they're down. The Dow Jones. It's so bad. But the real investment is the neighbors and comrades you make along the way, because though I mean, like, I don't know, it'll pay off, right? Like, if you can organize the people around you in any capacity, it will benefit you in the long run because there's more infrastructure that you can build up to harbor against the oncoming storms of like garbage landlords and shitty bosses and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's right. I wrote, so for people who don't know, I'm a section editor at G's Magazine, which is a very good publication that if you don't know anything about, you should look it up right now and buy a subscription if you can afford it. If you withheld your rent, use some of that rent money, buy a subscription to G's.
It's so good.
It's very good. And not just because I write for them. It would be good even if I didn't write for them. It was even before I wrote for them. But anyway, I write a section there about civil disobedience, and this time around, instead, I decided to write about social solidarity in light of the pandemic. And as I was looking for examples of things to report on, I found, at first I kind of thought, oh boy, this is going to be like a brutal Google search, because sometimes it is. But in this case, it was actually like I ended up with way more stuff than I could possibly use. And in addition to the work strike and rent strikes, there's all kinds of really fascinating mutual aid networks that are just popping up all over the place. It's Going Down, which is a podcast, but also a kind of anarchisty, lefty news source. They compiled like an updated list of mutual aid groups that are all around the US and Canada, and it is amazing. Like, it's staggering how many there are. And if you just kind of poke around on them and look up what people are doing, you know, they're not like radical things to do. It's like people posting, hey, I can't go outside of my apartment because I'm immunocompromised. Can someone give me groceries? And someone else being like, yes, I have a car and I will get you groceries once a week. Or, you know, people like dog walking for one another, or offering even just like their time to be available to people who are single and maybe stuck in their apartment and can't, you know, go out and need some social interaction. Like, those kind of simple acts do turn into very radical kinds of acts in the middle of a pandemic. And I think that too is a revelation of collective power, right? That you're not just powerless and stuck indoors because we're socially isolating. It actually sort of should jumpstart certain creative capacities that we have to figure out how to take care of each other, because we know that, you know, our bosses and prime ministers and presidents aren't going to do that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the second revelation that the powers that be have no idea what they're going to do in this situation, other than like find excuses to line their own pockets with more money, I think is an important revelation that will definitely take its toll on people, and their disillusionment with, you know, the current sort of administrations across the board. Yeah, the only people they're going to take care of are. The only way that we're going to take care of ourselves is if we kind of step up and do it with one another, which is a big task, but I think it's the only way to get through it.
I think you're right, Matt. I think you're onto something here.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate the affirmation. All right.
Yeah.
Let's go to.
Go ahead.
Let's go to one more piece in this roundup before we talk about other topics. This is from, so the Huffington Post, a weird place to get labor news sometimes, but again, everyone in the situation is a labor reporter. But a better place to go for labor news is Sarah Jones at the Intelligencer. Sarah Jones is probably one of my favorite labor reporters. It's weird to have favorite labor reporters, but she's it. She's my fave.
I should say she did a fantastic interview a little while ago, like months ago now, for Know Your Enemy, and it's really fun to listen to, both just to talk about labor reporting and also kind of her own, I don't know, journey and situation in journalism, coming from a rural area and from a conservative Christian background. Anyway, neither here nor there, but a very good thing to listen to if you need more.
You always need more Sarah Jones content. I have a news alert specifically for her articles, so that I'm dedicated. Big Sarah Jones head over here. So it's for my labor reporters. So we should start a fantasy labor reporters league or something.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I'm going to draft Sarah Jones and Hamilton Nolan, and they're going to be my two starting lineup people. I don't know. I couldn't even get that far in the sports metaphor, but it's great. All right. So anyway, Sarah Jones wrote this article very recently called "The Coronavirus is Radicalizing Workers," and this is what Sarah Jones has to say. Protests at Amazon, Instacart, and Whole Foods, where low-paid workers have found themselves on the front lines of a global disaster, have created a public relations nightmare for the companies who say they're providing essential services to Americans stuck at home. While workers like Chris Smalls don't dispute the necessity of their jobs, they say their employers aren't taking basic steps to protect them from infection. As they tell it, these essential corporations are actually placing the public at risk. Now, desperation is driving these workers to measures some never thought they'd take. The pandemic changed things, Smalls told Intelligencer on Tuesday, and so did Amazon's response to the crisis. A 5-year Amazon employee who has never been involved in any previous organizing work, Chris Smalls suddenly finds himself out of a job. Amazon fired him on Monday, hours after he helped lead a protest at a Staten Island warehouse. This is a little bit later in the article. This is a quote actually at the very end from Sarah Nelson, who is not a labor reporter, but one of my faves in the labor movement.
Yeah, she rocks.
She's so good. Yeah, she's the president of the flight attendants in the CWA. Man, do I like Sarah Nelson. Okay, anyways, Sarah Nelson says at the end of this article, "We will band together as a nation of working people to demand it." That is like the demands that they're going for: paid sick leave, etc. It's horrible that a lot of people will feel more pain in the process because the system has been so rigged against the public for so long, she added. No more. Sarah Nelson's right. No more. But the story about Chris Smalls that Sarah Jones writes, I think, is pretty powerful, right? This dude who's just like an Amazon worker, right? He's never been. People have been trying to organize an Amazon for a long time, and Amazon's responded with giving them, some small wins like $15 an hour and some other things like that. But like by and large, Amazon has been a thoroughly shitty place to work forever. Like they track like every small thing that they do. It's like it's the height of Taylorism for sure. Anyways, so this dude who's been like playing by the rules of Amazon for 5 years, he steps up and like this whole situation is enough, right? It's not just a danger to his life, his family's life, his workers' lives, but also he thinks it's a public health risk because they're not like taking time to clean the warehouses. A part of the story I remember from earlier in the week was that like because Amazon tracks every single thing they do, every single task that a worker does in an Amazon warehouse is tracked, and like they get you might get written up for taking too long to do something. Like the rub was that like if somebody sneezed, they wouldn't have enough time to go wash their hands without being like written up for it.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's first of all, that's absolutely like absurd way to run a warehouse. People that work there, that's crazy. That's not a good thing to do. So anyways, this is like too much for this guy Chris Smalls, and he participates in this protest, and they all walk out. And like good for them, but like this is, I think, indicative of like the larger moment that's happening, right? The material conditions are shaping these workers who have just been workers for the most part into people who are now ready to throw down over these things. And I think that's, again, Marxist. We've been saying it for years, and now we're right. We've been proven right finally.
That's right. Here and there, for sure. I'd like to be proven even more right. Let's hope. Fingers crossed.
That's right.
But yeah, it's true though, right? Like the wild thing about this is so many people are activating and organizing not because they're Marxists, which is very important, right? They're doing it because this is just what life forces on you if you live under capitalism. I was thinking about this speech that a guy made at a construction site here in Toronto. This is a video people might have seen. It went sort of viral, I guess. He is a union member, so not like a guy who isn't connected to anything, but nevertheless, the speech is pretty great. It's like pretty impromptu. His name's Jacques De Silva. He's a member of the Laborers International Union of North America, and in it, he says some pretty wild things. A couple of lines that really stuck out to me, though, that I included in my G's column. One was, he says, "I've got an 86-year-old with oxygen at home. My wife is crying every time I go home because she doesn't know if I'm going to kill her father if I have something." So really setting the stakes pretty high, but honestly. And he says, "When you're on the work site there, you guys don't have 6 feet around you. We're breathing on each other. Where's your eating facilities? Are they sanitized? Do you have water to wash your hands when you eat your sandwiches?" And he goes on to say quite a lot more, and specifically indicts the foreman for not caring apparently about the conditions on that work site. And you just have to imagine that like in the middle of a pandemic when everyone else is staying home, including your family members, and you have to go to work and basically be around a bunch of people who may or may not have a virus that could kill somebody that you're going home to, that leaves an impression, right? And I think that is a big deal. It's Marxists have a way of talking about this and, not predicting it as some kind of prophecy or something, but understanding that this is the nature of the economy that we live in, that it will create these kinds of contradictions and people will have to respond. And the Marxist bet is if we can at least try to remember that those things are always going to come up and organize in the meantime such that when they do come up, we have some apparatuses capable of activating that stuff in the right direction, then we would be better off than otherwise. And again, it looks like we're right. One more time that Marxists are right. I wish they were right about more things. I wish they were right that we'd automatically have a revolution after this, but at least they're right about that. The capitalism is bad, and people do just kind of figure that out on their own.
Right. Yeah, well, get it up on the scoreboard just the same. We'll mark it down. It's fine. Man, just a quick, I guess this is just more of a reflection on the point you just made. Kind of in the trenches the other day when all the fast food workers were on strike, something I kept seeing people saying, or like the sort of public relations spin on the whole situation was like, well, if you have coronavirus, you could have paid sick time, right? Like that. Well, if you have that particular thing, we'll give you paid sick time. I don't know what all this complaining is about, but like it's such a absolutely like naive, like purposefully naive way to look at the world or policy to make. It's like like that's just not that's not the nature of sickness, that you get it and you immediately know what it is, or that even if you did know what it was and you like even if you had all the symptoms, it's not like there's an easy way to get tested and like basically anywhere. It's just a completely weird public relations spin, and that's what so much of this is during this time, right? That companies like, I mean, whether it's McDonald's or Amazon or Whole Foods or whatever, they're going to make some kind of nice sounding like press release about how they actually care about their workers, but like in practice they don't, because they don't know how. But like but their workers couldn't self-report having coronavirus without like jumping through a whole lot of hoops before they would even get there. It's just a completely ridiculous situation.
Yeah, that's right. I think too, one other thing to just add to this whole piece, especially just to add the Marxist piece, is everything you're saying is right, Matt, right? Like these companies find all kinds of subtle ways of basically, I don't know, giving up their own responsibility, I guess, or pretending that they care when they don't. Another thing that gets revealed in this is that capitalism is something that is kind of like, it's the context in which the pandemic has occurred, right? And in many cases, like we talked about a couple weeks ago, it is in many real respects, a driving cause of a global pandemic like the one that we have. And that's something that you can kind of get your head around, maybe in a global sense, right? Like we have these big, massive networks of commerce and trade and travel, and so it's very easy for a virus to get around, let's say. But I think it actually helps to consider it more locally. And I was really helped, at least myself, by a statement put out by the Communist Party of Ontario about the rent strike. And what was great is they have a way of talking about all the situations in Ontario before the pandemic happened that led to the crisis being as bad as it is right now. And I think that's like a huge point to kind of keep bringing up as well, that like the pandemic didn't create a housing crisis. The housing crisis has been here, and the pandemic is now making it even worse than it already was. And yeah, all that to say, I think once again, just Marxists have a way of kind of putting these things in a context that allows us to understand them a little bit more than just kind of finding ourselves bowled over by them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like the coronavirus didn't make an army of low wage workers, right? Like it just provided the situation for them to all be laid off at once.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's bad. That's why Sarah Nelson, the president of the Flight Attendants CWA, is right. No more.
No more. That's right. Well, let's talk about the Christian response to all this, which has not been so forthright, not been so no more about it. not that Christians are on the side of the coronavirus by any stretch, and not even that they're necessarily against the working class in every case, although in some cases they certainly are. But they aren't on the front lines, it seems to me, in the same way that labor leaders are, which is unfortunate.
Well, let's get a few things on the table.
Talk about...
Yeah. First of all.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Before we get to the bummer piece, we should talk about some good things that Christians are doing, because they are doing some very good things.
Like, we have to hedge our bets here. Like, we have to make sure we say these things. Like, some churches, some congregations, some denominations are doing work. Like, they're doing mutual aid work. They're providing meals for people. They're doing companionship types of programs. They're doing these things. These things are real. They exist, and they're even like putting themselves in some risky situations to continue these types of ministries during this type of pandemic.
Yeah, and like, the people that you would expect to be out there in an even more radical way are, like, the Catholic Worker is consistently being quoted in all kinds of articles all across the country as being, it's a Catholic Worker church or Catholic Worker community, in Detroit, let's say, that is still staying open despite, closures all around. Or it's the Catholic Workers in New York City who are really closing the gaps and ministering to the homeless when other places aren't, right? Like, that's all very good and extremely important. Another kind of weird thing, but like weird in that maybe I wouldn't have expected it, which might be unfair on my part, but I was happy to see, was the Red Letter Christians group, which is kind of like a progressive evangelical type, but also a weird in some ways evangelical type group. They did sign a statement on against Asian racism, anti-Asian racism in the time of COVID-19, which was a statement put out by a group called the Asian American Christian Collaborative. And I was really happy to see that, right? Because that's an angle that gets lost in a lot of this conversation. There is tons of anti-Asian sentiment, as you've seen probably in the news, things like calling the virus the Wuhan virus or the Chinese virus, etc. And there's all kinds of like real racist actions that have kind of come out of all of that in real daily life. So it's great that Christians are recognizing that that's something that they should speak out against, right? That could seem like maybe a tertiary issue given all the problems. So I was pleased to see that. Anyway, all that to say,
let me throw one more out there though.
Yeah.
So okay, Christians are showing up in all these ways, in the usual Christian ways, but some Christians are even going kind of above and beyond and showing up in the less usual Christian ways. So, for example, in my city, St. Louis, there's a really strong like tradition of churches, like progressive church denominations, Christian and Jewish and Catholic, of like working with the labor movement. So there's every month in St. Louis, there's a faith labor breakfast where you go down and eat breakfast with all of the people. And it's great. It's fantastic. Anyways, there's one organization that is a part of that called Metropolitan Congregations United. And it's just like a big it's a big network of churches. Anyways, they showed up for people striking this past week. So it's not like Christians aren't even involved in the labor movement, right?
Right.
But it's like,
right.
All that to say, it's not the norm though. Right? It's like, this is like one instance where that's happened.
Yeah. And as always, I feel like we should make a distinction between, okay, there are great, very good Christians who do basically like normal, good Christian things, right? Running soup kitchens and drop-in centers and all that kind of stuff. And like, that's courageous in regular times. And it's even more courageous now. And so there's definitely not pretending that those things aren't happening or don't exist. We have to make a distinction between those people who are extremely important and like the kind of, I don't know what to call it, like the circuit of Christian influencers, or like public Christian figures or progressive Christian figures. I don't know how to create an umbrella term, but you know the people that I mean.
Like, we don't want to throw anyone under the bus here that might be doing something that's actually good. But on the other hand, like the largest like Christian angle to the story of COVID-19 is like, should churches stay open? Like that's like
exactly. Yeah.
It's that type of dumb shit that like we have to, I think, strive against because it's like the worst.
Yes.
And like most goofy take possible. Like, Christians are a big group of people who are supposed to care about the common good in one way or another, right? That's the common good is the Catholic social teaching word for it. But like just the same, Christians in general should care about that. And if your biggest concern is like, well, should we have church on Sunday? That's dumb. That's bad. Don't think that. Think about something different. Think about a different way to be involved.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, there's a whole faction of the Christian right that is like actively suicidal, trying to spread this virus for some reason on their own university campuses, etc. But they're not worth talking about. The real kind of issue, I think, or the real rub is trying to find ways of getting progressive Christians to more explicitly throw in with the working class as part of a side, I think. And that's really maybe like something where I think leftists and Christian leftists in particular can find some way of like speaking into this whole crisis, like trying to express to Christians like, all that stuff is very important. All the soup kitchen stuff, extremely important. Like, keep on doing it. And when you find those surprises, like a bunch of Christians signing in an anti-Asian racism statement, like all very good, worth promoting. But at the same time, like Christians should be not just kind of like following the trends of the labor movement. They should be within it. And there have been times in history that they've been loudly, as Christians, participating in it. Again, there's lots of Christians in the labor movement, but not, they're not like outspoken Christian leaders and also labor leaders, kind of showing the duality of that identity by any stretch. And for good reason, right? But it's too bad that, like you said, Matt, the main story here with Christians and COVID-19 is should we keep our churches open?
Yeah, totally. I mean, like, again, in my very small sort of sector of the world, like when there are strikes, when there are marches, like there are pastors and church folks and lay people who show up to like, get arrested with workers. Like that's what I'm talking about, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. That type of action is maybe what we should urge the more progressive-y Christian crowd to like move toward. Not that they need to get arrested, but then they need to show up for workers, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, like who cares about whether or not your church will be open? More like, what are you going to do next, right? Like what's the next step? Like how are you going to support your community that actually is going to be struggling through this? I mean, if you're a person, if you're a compassionate person who can like, see Jesus in the least of these, or whatever kind of way we want to formulate that, all you have to do is listen to some of the stories of these workers, and you will be convicted that like, this is where you need to be. This is a struggle you should be invested in, right? There are there are low wage workers everywhere who need our help dearly, like economically so, socially so. They need strong advocates to the government. They need all kinds of things. And like that's what we should show up for, I think, right? Like those are, if you want to know how to love your neighbor, like literally go look at the people who still have to go to work right now and like figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. I think I hate coming across as like lecturing, at which I feel like I just sort of like enter into that mode in this podcast sometimes. I feel bad about that. But I guess to put it in sort of invitational Christian language,
Ooh.
Which I don't use very often, so it's gonna sound strange, but it's
come
like
to the table. Come on over to this.
Yeah, come to the table. What does it mean to, be the church in the era of COVID-19?
Because it's not a building.
It doesn't mean
it's all of us.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's not a building. It's all of us. What's in the middle of church? You are. That's what I learned in Sunday school. I guess what I mean is like we're living in a situation where a company owned by the richest person on the entire planet, Jeff Bezos, who could solve like the financial crisis of the United States probably single-handedly, like that man's company is actively endangering the lives of people who are worried about whether or not they can make their rent. And if you're a Christian person who thinks that, Jesus came to like judge the rich and stand up for the poor, you should have something to say about that. That's more than like, we'll be there when you can't afford your groceries, like definitely do that for sure. Be there when people can't afford their groceries, but like be there, 2 steps before that also.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I don't know. A lot of people still have to go to work, and that's important. Not everyone can like work from home, and I think that's something to think about too. But for all of us that can work from home, that have the luxury of being able to social distance ourselves from the comfort of our own homes, like the internet is here, man. It's for your taking. You can do all kinds of things, all kinds of advocacy work on the internet, and just find a place to get plugged in and like get at it. That's all we're asking you to do, I think, is take a look around, look for your local union or worker center or branch of the DSA or whatever, and just like ask what you can do and get into it.
Yeah, I think it's also important to say, like, yes, we don't all have the luxury of like working from home, but none of us really, like extremely few of us, I should say, actually do have to go to work right now. Some people for sure do. There's big important infrastructures that need to be maintained, etc. But like the amount of people who do go to work definitely don't have to. And at the very least, people shouldn't be worried about like trading their health for their wage. And I think that's something that like, it's not it's not a luxury to be able to not have to gamble in the morning with your own life or going to work. Like that should be a baseline normal thing to do in a society, is not have to ask that question. And the fact that we do treat that as a luxury in a moment of pandemic is pretty bad.
It's just telling of like the overarching like sickness of the soul that so many people in the United States have, right? Like I mean, you're right in saying like it shouldn't be a luxury, but like it is, because people need to eat. Like people have to choose right now: are they going to take a sick day, an unpaid sick day, or are they going to go to work where they're going to like endanger their life and their family's life? And like that, you're right that should not even be a question that you have to ask, but yet it is. And
it
is a question we have to ask because so many people are completely given over to the idolatry of capitalism, of worshiping like getting more money for themselves in a global crisis than they are caring about their workers. Like I mean, Jesus is right to send the rich to hell. Like, it's just like so obvious at this moment, right? Like, why does Jeff Bezos need people to go do this right now? You know, like, what is going on? Why does McDonald's really need these people to show up? Like, what is happening here? Like, could we not organize the situation in any different way to get around this? And like, the answer is like, yes, we obviously can. But the fact is that no, we will not, unless people really do organize and create a different type of power.
Yeah, and I think that's the most important thing, right? Like, we don't have to wait around for Jeff Bezos to have some, like, miraculous conversion, because he never will have one.
Right.
The fact is, like, Jeff Bezos has money because a lot of people go to work every day. And if people just didn't, he wouldn't have it very long. And like, it's weird to put things that simply, but it is true. And of course, that's like a very utopic vision of imagining like a real general strike where all of Jeff Bezos' workers don't go to work for a few days. But that's the kind of vision that you have to at least kind of operate with. And if Christianity does anything, it definitely teaches you how to imagine things that aren't visible, right? Things that, hoping for things that you can't see, all that kind of stuff. The kingdom of God is here, and also it's not quite here. And I think that lesson of, well, if we want this world to be different, then we have to organize for it. That's really going to be the make or break moment of the coronavirus. It's like, you don't have to look at it as finding a silver lining or something. It's more like looking at this as, well, this event, this crisis is going to be whatever we make of it. So if you're a Christian person, you should want to make of it an economy that is better for poor and working people.
Yeah, that's right.
Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard and you want to hear even more, you can do that at patreon.com/themagnificast. That's where all the jokes are going. We're saving the best ones for behind the paywall, and we appreciate folks who support us there. Also, we have some new merch in our Redbubble store. Just go to redbubble.com and search the Magnificast. You can find all kinds of stuff. There's a new Ernesto Cardinal doodle. There's some Daniel Berrigan stuff hanging around there. There's all kinds of goodies you can get on stickers and shirts, and soon even buttons. That's the Redbubble rumor. We'll see whether or not that pans out. Let's see. You can find us on Twitter at The Magnificast. You can email us at themagnificast@gmail.com. And as always, our music is by Amore Armstrong, and our outro is by The Illogical Spoon. See you next week.
I don't want to get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Well, keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up. Well, you keep your hoods up and you stay up late.